Officer. Brodie.
Thank you very much indeed, Mike. And yes, brethren, I am your Provincial Communications Officer, which basically means one of my jobs is to celebrate the wonderful work that you're doing in your lodges. It could be fundraising, it could be the amazing brethren that you have within your lodges, it could be you've got an event coming up, whatever it might be, share your stories with me. And I'll do my very best to not only share it with the province, but I'll do my very best to share it with the wider world as well. And you'll find my email address very easy. It's in the Square News. Mike was referring to that just a few minutes ago. So we're in there every single week. Now, tonight, brethren, we have the honour of welcoming our Grand Secretary, Dr. David Staples. Now, let me tell you a little bit about David before we hand over to him. David was born in 1974 and studied biochemistry and medicine at the University of Oxford. David is a consultant physician in acute internal medicine and works one clinical session a week at Peterborough City Hospital. In addition to that, he works as an associate clinical advisor to the Health Service and Parliamentary Ombudsman. But returning to Freemasonry, if we can, David was initiated into Freemasonry in 1997, appointed Grand Director of Ceremonies in 2014, and promoted to Deputy Grand Director of Ceremonies in 2016, which you may have witnessed on that fabulous TV show on Sky, Inside the Freemasons, which I think I've watched 300 times. David was appointed to the newly created role of Chief Executive in September 2017 and invested as Grand Secretary in April 2018. Brethren, we are honoured that our audience with this evening is with our Grand Secretary, Dr. David Staples.
Brodie, thank you very much for that lovely introduction. Right Worshipful Provincial Grand Master, thank you very much indeed for the kind invitation to come and address Worcestershire. It is always very nice to get out and about. Much nicer, of course, to do it in person. And I think the end is now very much in sight. So the first thing I would like to say is I am really looking forward to coming back to Worcestershire when I can do it in the flesh and for real, to come and see your wonderful lodges, your wonderful province, and some real people who aren't little pixelated squares and dots on a screen. I feel very much as though I've regressed to my teenage years because I spend the vast amount of my time upstairs in my bedroom on my computer, and occasionally my 86-year-old mother, who lives with my wife and I, brings me a chocolate biscuit and a cup of tea, and I swear to God, I'm back in the 1990s again. It's extraordinary, but it is nice every now and then to escape, and this evening is one such escape, which I'm very, very grateful for. I don't like to talk for too long because I like to give you the opportunity to ask me whatever you want to. And I do enjoy those sessions. Brodie's right. And one thing I would say is that I'm not terribly precious about the questions that I get asked. So if you're grumpy about something or cheesed off about something, don't worry about offending me. Ask me your question, make your point, and I will give you a straight answer as to why it is that UGLE feels that we're doing whatever it is that we're doing that is cheesing you off. So I'd just like to underline that I'm not terribly precious about those sorts of things. If you've got something that's you want to ask me, here's your opportunity. Before we get to the question and answer sessions, though, I'm going to just talk a little bit about what it is that I do and what UGLE has been doing over the last 9 months or so. I think the first thing to say is that the United Grand Lodge of England is an organisation which is terribly proud of the integrity of its members, the friendships and the connections that they make, and the good that they do for the communities from which they're drawn, but most importantly, for the fun that we all have along the journey. And as I have been out and about over the last 9 months or so virtually, the one thing that strikes me more than anything else is how everybody can't wait to get back to how things were 12 months, 18 months ago. And that time is most certainly coming. When I first arrived at UGLE 3 and a bit years ago, I was charged with 3 things, really. The first of which was to modernise the administration. The second of which was to try to shift the public perception of Freemasonry. And the third of which was to think and look about the problems of membership. How do we engage our members? How do we attract new members? And it was an interesting post. Before me, it was split into two. There was a chief operating officer who managed the commercial side and Freemasons Hall, and then there was the Grand Secretary who very much managed the Masonic side, the ceremonial side, and the administration of the organisation as a whole. And I think we've made some significant inroads into a number of areas, most of which I would say probably the most inroads we've made have been on the communications front. You will all remember UGLE taking a distinct stand some time ago with the Enough is Enough campaign, which for us was to draw a line underneath some of the nonsense that have been openly spoken about Freemasons and Freemasonry for many years before. But it's become apparent that whilst taking on some of our detractors and those who don't like us is an entirely laudable thing to do, we get much more traction talking about to those people who have heard of Freemasonry but don't know terribly much about us at all. And that equates to around 40% of the population. And of those 40%, there are no preconceptions to overcome. They're a much friendlier and more sensible audience. And it doesn't take a huge amount when you have an organization with a history and a heritage and some of the things behind it that Freemasonry has done to actually win them over and turn them into people who are actively supporters of Freemasonry and who will go out and become ambassadors for Freemasonry. And some of them may even choose to join us, and that would be absolutely lovely. So I think communications has been one thing that we have made significant inroads in over the last few years or so. You will all have seen the sorts of things that we've been doing over the pandemic in terms of First Rising and in terms of some of the virtual events that we've put on. We have virtual organ concerts at Freemasons Hall. We've had all sorts of different virtual speaker meetings, a lecture series. And for the first time, we are talking directly to our members as the United Grand Lodge of England, something which sometimes people don't really know exists. I certainly didn't. When I went into my lodge as an undergraduate, that's all that existed for Freemasonry. And then sometime later, I discovered that MET existed. And then sometime later, I discovered that UGLE existed. And actually, of course, UGLE has an enormous role, not just in the governance and running of day-to-day Freemasonry, but in the position of us in the world. We are the premier Grand Lodge in the world. We were the first Grand Lodge to be formed. And that means a number of our foreign Grand Lodges look to us for guidance and sometimes to police various things that are happening within the Masonic world. We always shy away from that. We don't think that's our role, but we are regarded very, very well and very highly across the world. And so we have to be extremely cautious in some of the things that we do, because if we do things which are generally too far ahead of their time, that can set precedents and cause all sorts of problems. In addition to Freemasonry, UGLE, I think, has changed most over the last 3 or 4 years as a result of the inclusion of all sorts of representatives from provinces up and down the country. When I arrived, the board certainly had a number of provincial Grand Masters on, but there wasn't necessarily a huge amount of representation in the various other things that we did. And there was certainly a feeling that on occasions UGLE would come up with a bright idea, they'd pull the pin out, lob the grenade over at the provinces, and then they were just left to get on with whatever bright idea that we come up with. And that has changed significantly under the chairmanship of Geoffrey Deering, the current president of the board, who has formed a number of working parties to look at the core areas that we need to be active in. So there's a communications and marketing working party with representatives from the 10 regional communications groups, which is a fancy name for a small collection of provinces, 5 or 6 provinces, with a PGM representing their views on that field. Similarly, we have the same sort of thing in the membership working party under the chairmanship of Michael Ward. And we also have the GMCCC, which looks at our relationship with charity and our relationship with the Masonic Charitable Foundation. And so we now have 30 PGMs who are very, very active within the centre, deciding the sorts of policies that UGLE needs to be involved in, sharing best practice, and thinking about how we can move the organisation forward in a way which really delivers for our members, but also delivers for our future to ensure that we are still here in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, and dare I say, even another 300 years. And I have absolutely no doubt that we are going from strength to strength. And as soon as we get out of the doldrums of COVID, we've already heard over 160 people waiting in your province for initiation. That is mirrored up and down the country. There are, not only do our members can't wait to get back, but we've got huge waiting lists up and down the country in provinces of people who want to join us. I'm going to stop there, actually, because what I would like to do now is let you grill me about what you're interested in. So, Brodie, I'm going to go back to you and see what we've got.
Thank you very much indeed, Grand Secretary. We have a lot of questions, as you can imagine. So we'll begin with the first question that came in this evening. What is the UGLE view on vaccine passports?
I'm going to give you, the legal view. The legal view from my head of legal is that it is discriminatory and unwise, and that is within the current legal framework. However, I'm aware that this is spoken about a lot in Parliament at the moment, and it may well be that Parliament choose to change the legal framework, but there would need to be either a statutory instrument or primary legislation which made it legal. Our advice has gone out to Masonic halls that to stop people attending because they have not had a vaccination would not be a wise thing to do. I don't know why that is, and my personal view is that unless there is a medical reason why you shouldn't have a vaccine, you should have a vaccine. And I think that is good for you as an individual. It's good for society at large. And Freemasons aren't usually believers of conspiracy theories. They're usually the subject of conspiracy theories. And certainly everybody that I've spoken to is quite happy to have a vaccine. But no, the legal position is that you cannot discriminate or prevent somebody from coming to, say, a Masonic meeting because they haven't had a vaccine yet.
Thank you, sir. And this is kind of continuing on with that theme. Will all members have to have had both jabs before being allowed to return to meetings?
No, same question, or rather same answer. It is, under the present framework, illegal to discriminate against somebody who has chosen not to have a vaccine.
Absolutely. Do you think we will be able to bring new initiates to the craft this year, or will it be next year?
I think we'll be able to do it this year. I am anticipating rule of 6 or something along those lines from mid-May, and mid-May is when I've instructed that Freemasons Hall is ready to go. And I would anticipate that we're back to some semblance of normality around September. It may be that in the winter, there's various variants popping up which require things to come back for a little bit, restrictions to come back for a little bit. But some of the vaccine technology around at the moment is really very good indeed, and the ability to churn something out quickly to a new variant is very high. So I think that we will be able to bring people in this year. There are novel ways of doing that, of course. Buckinghamshire, for example, is intending to hire the entirety of Freemasons Hall on an empty day, bring it up all of their lodges, take over all of their temples, and do, I don't know, I mean, worst case scenario, it would be something like a mass Japanese wedding in a football stadium. Best case scenario, it will be a whole host of lodges doing their own thing in their own individual temples. And there will be a lot of people who are brought in on one day, and there will be a lot of new Buckinghamshire Freemasons the next day.
That's exciting times ahead, isn't it, for all of us? With hindsight, as retention is now even more important, was UGLE and Supreme Grand Chapter wrong to introduce Rule 66B in 2016? And perhaps you could elaborate on exactly what that is for those who are unaware.
Well, I'm always terrified when people start quoting the Book of Constitutions at me, especially if I don't have Graham Redmond sitting on my shoulder. 66B is the rule which says that unless you are a member of a craft lodge, you should not be a member of a Royal Arch chapter. There are various exceptions and various sort of get-arounds for certain people and certain characters, but that's the basis of it. This really was about us getting our own house in order before we started talking to some of the other orders which require craft membership. We believe very firmly, as does His Royal Highness the Duke of Kent, that the first order that you should join after the craft is the Royal Arch. And in order to meet that criteria, you have to be obviously a craft mason, but you have to then remain a craft mason in order to continue to go through the Royal Arch. Similarly, in order to be a member of almost all of the other orders in masonry, those administered from Mark Mason's Hall and the Rose Choir, you also have to be an active member of a craft lodge. So some time ago, we went to them and we said, well, you know, when are you going to enforce this? And they said, well, we'll enforce it when you sort your own house out, because actually you may have a whole host of people who are members of Royal Arch chapters who are not subscribing members of the craft. And we went away and we thought about that and we thought, yeah, actually they're probably right. It is, you know, there are circumstances where clearly you are unfortunate. So, for example, if your lodge happens to fold and collapse, then you're not going to be immediately sort of slung out. There are grace periods, and honorary membership does count as membership of a craft lodge for the point of view of Rule 66B. So I think there are ways of dealing with it, but our fundamental belief is that you should be a craft mason if you're going to be a member of the Royal Arch or indeed any of the other orders.
Thank you very much indeed, sir. Getting lots of questions in, so I'm trying to keep an eye on my messages actually, because they keep shifting up one place. Why must we put a specific monetary value for fees in the bylaws? Surely this means we have to ask for an amendment to be approved every time it has to increase.
Yeah, that one's a bit complicated for me. I might have to defer that to Graham Redman, I'm afraid. I can talk to you about why we have model bylaws. And we have model bylaws because we've had 300 years of people writing in and arguing about things in bylaws. And after that experience, we know what a good set of bylaws should look like in order to stop the sorts of arguments which come up time and time again. And putting the amount of money that somebody is going to owe for what they get is, I think, good practice, because what you don't want to do is have some sort of unscrupulous lodge not tell people what it's actually going to cost them, and then they get hit with a ridiculous fee and find that they've actually picked up the bar tab for the rest of the lodge for the past sort of 18 months or so. So I think that's the best I can do without falling back on Graham, who I don't believe is with us today.
Thank you, Grand Secretary. When is the acronym of UGLE going to be changed to make it more recognisable to the general public and perhaps the press?
Yes, I mean, this is a very pertinent question. Nobody has a clue what UGLE is. When we have polled members of the public, they know what Freemasons are, most of them. They know what Freemasonry is, 89% brand recognition, by which I mean they've heard of it. Only 49% have a fixed opinion of us, and the vast majority of that 49% don't particularly like us. So that tells us two things. It tells us, firstly, that we shouldn't be concentrating on the percentage that don't like us. We should be concentrating on the 40% that have heard of us but don't have a clue about us. And what we need to do to get at them, as it were, is say who we are and what we do and be a little bit more open and transparent. UGLE is, you'll see in the sort of the marketing stuff that we are turning out. We always use Freemasonry and Freemasons to sort of major on that point. But we are the United Grand Lodge of England and have been for a long time. And so as the governing body, that is, if you like, the brand recognition of the governing body of Freemasonry. But it's up to us to promote and get out there the messages of Freemasonry, not the messages of UGLE.
Absolutely. You mentioned the large number of potential initiates in the wings. In my mother lodge, we have 5 in the waiting. Are there sufficient numbers to replace those who have sadly passed away to the Grand Lodge above, or may choose after COVID not to continue or reduce the number of orders they're currently involved with?
So thus far, touch wood, we have done very well as an organisation. If you look purely at the actuarial predictions from the early mortality data of COVID, and I just worked this out on the back of a cigarette packet in the first couple of weeks, we were expecting to lose around 6,000 to 7,000 of our members to COVID. We have lost significantly fewer than that, certainly less than a third, I think, of that number. And that is extremely good news indeed. In terms of people who aren't dying from COVID but are choosing not to be Masons anymore, we polled this on two separate occasions. Once in June of last year, when probably nobody really knew how long it was going to go on for, and we found that 1.4% of our members were thinking of leaving us, and the vast majority of the people who wanted to leave us were in the over 80 category, and so probably those who might be thinking of winding down anyway. When sort of September, October came along, we thought, well, actually, it's gone on a bit longer than everybody thought, and you know, I wonder if that's still the case. And so we repolled, and we found that actually even fewer people at that point wanted to leave, presumably because all the people who were going to leave had done so at that point. And I think we went down to 1.2%. And anecdotally, everybody I see and talk to is much more interested about when we're going to get back to it, rather than thinking of leaving. And so I am actually quite optimistic that the doom and gloom predictions of tens of thousands of people deciding that Freemasonry wasn't for them anymore were probably over-egged, and we're not expecting that mass exodus.
Thank you, Grand Secretary. What is the general impression of the logo that has been used lately, that has the square and compass separate rather than the more traditional version?
Oh, that's a good one, isn't it? I think it's fair to say lots of people can't stand it, and some people like it. Be interesting to see what the poll on this collection is. We can't really do polls on Zoom, can we? But there was a need to move away from something that was unrecognizable, which was our crest from Grand Lodge, and to do something which updated it. And I would say, I'm going to put a disclaimer in at this point, it was long before my time. It was 2 years before I arrived. The square and the compass is universally recognized. If you put the square and the compass on the side of air ambulance, or on the side of a blood bike, or on the side of a fast response vehicle, people know that that's something to do with Freemasonry. They might not know terribly much more than that, but they know that there is something about Freemasonry that has bought that vehicle, donated that vehicle. And I think that's reflected in, or rather the confidence in the logo is reflected in how many vehicles actually have that logo on the side of it. And to my understanding, it's the sum total of 0. London has put the square and compasses on the side of the air ambulance. The blood bikes and everything else have the square and compasses on. It's not the UGLE logo. And this goes back a little bit to the previous question about brand recognition of UGLE. We don't have terribly much brand recognition, and neither will we have whilst we're called the United Grand Lodge of England. But Freemasonry itself is a global brand with a huge amount of recognition, and it's that we need to capitalize on. As and when people say, I'm interested in the Freemasons, or they put Freemasonry in the Google search term, they will come and they will find us as the governing body. And so I'm happy with the logo for what it is, which is the representation. Excuse me. Let's have a little bit of this. Any excuse?
A wise choice, sir.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's the representation of the governing body, but I don't think I would be at all happy if it tried to break out of that and become the recognised symbol of Freemasonry, because I don't think it's ever going to be that.
How do we stand with ballots still in 2019, as they are all now obsolete?
They are. So ballots cease to be after a year. There is a rule in the Book of Constitutions called Rule 160, which allows a candidate in circumstances of emergency or distress to be proposed, balloted and initiated at the same meeting, and that can be an emergency meeting. And whilst the enforcement, or rather the policing of this rule, sits with the Right Worshipful Provincial Grand Master, most provincial Grand Masters have decided that having to wait a year to get into Freemasonry would, in these circumstances, constitute such a distress and such an emergency as to warrant the use of that rule. I'm sure Robert would be entirely happy for that to happen in Worcestershire if that were the case. So it hasn't. Whilst the ballots have lapsed, the that rule can be used to bring people in one go.
Brethren, I'm going to, Brethren's looking at our secretary there. Brethren, I'm going to spend another 10 minutes asking questions to our Grand Secretary. So if you have any more, I'd urge you to get them in, but we have plenty, as you can imagine. Could Grand Lodge consider reducing dues for Brethren joining a second lodge?
We have considered it, and we've considered it extensively. In fact, it's probably been the most considered subject at various board meetings over my time, because it comes up a lot. Our view is that UGLE does not support a situation where people who are members of multiple lodges are financially subsidised by those who are members of a single unit. Were we to adopt a policy of one membership fee and you can join as many units as you want, everybody's dues would have to go up by around 20 quid each. And that's a big increase on most people's dues. So our opinion is that if you do more Freemasonry, you pay a bit more for Freemasonry. But if, you, like the vast majority of people, you are a member of a single unit, then you pay to be a member of that single unit. And if you want to join any more, then you pay for those as well. That answer doesn't please everybody, but that's the decision that's been taken, and that's the rationale behind it. It's primarily the iniquity of having people who are members of one unit subsidising people who are members of many more.
Thank you, sir. This is a very interesting one, actually, because if you ever watch any TV programmes, especially from back in the day, Masons weren't particularly depicted well. So when Masons are depicted in TV programmes, they're normally the bad guys. What can be done to change that perception in the world of television to the general public?
Yes, I mean, the trouble is now that with the endless reruns of Morse and the infamous graffitiing of his car with all sorts of Masonic symbols, I think we're in a transition period is the real answer. In times gone by, and not terribly long ago, whenever you read anything about Freemasons in the national media, it was Freemasons, they're the buggers who have done X, Y, and Z, and you can substitute whatever nefarious and nasty things X, Y, and Z was, but that would be the headline. In the last sort of 4 or 5 months, we have been Freemasons, remember them. They used to be up to all sorts of stuff, but now look at the great things they're doing. And then we get 14, 15 column inches of good stuff about us. And I sincerely hope that in a year's time or 18 months' time, all of the nonsense will have been forgotten and we will be firmly established as a force for good in society. And I think the more open we are about who we are and what we do, and the less shy and reticent we are about talking about the things that we do, including the things that we do within our ceremonies, without giving away any of the things that we don't want to give away to spoil for people who might want to join us, then the better position we will be in. There are people out there who think that a Masonic ceremony involves us sitting around and subverting the planning laws because they have no idea what actually happens in a Masonic lodge. But as soon as you start saying it's a ceremony that has its roots in 3 centuries of history, it teaches important moral lessons. Number one, I can't remember them now. Number one, look after those less fortunate than yourself. Number 2, improve yourself. Number 3, use your one life wisely. Suddenly people have got a handle to see what might go on in there. And more importantly, they've got a handle that what goes on in there is something for good. It's not something weird or secret. And I think that's extraordinarily important. And the more of that we do, and the more our members are ambassadors for what we do, the more everything else just seeps into fiction, where it should be.
Well, Secretary, although not your remit, the MCF is another three-letter acronym that means nothing to most people. Can you give us your view on that?
Getting the political ones tonight, aren't we? I don't think you're wrong. Masonic, we know from polling, conjures up satanic and demonic. It is not a good word to use amongst people who are not Freemasons. Language is important, and the things that we say and the words that we use to describe ourselves have a fundamental effect on how we are perceived and how people feel about us. And so, regrettably, again, we did some sentiment and we did some polling, and we found out what words mean to members of the public. And Masonic isn't well received. Freemasonry is much better. They don't have a problem with Freemasons, but they really do have a problem with Masonic. And so the charitable arm, which gives £48 million of charity of our money to people each year, actually is called something which turns the public off. And so my job is try to influence a change in that if that's what needs to happen. And that involves collecting a lot more evidence and presenting it in a way which is irrefutable. Things do change over time. Watch this space. Let's see what happens. I'm certainly not saying that I'm campaigning to change the name or the organisation, but at the moment the name doesn't do us as Freemasons terribly much good.
Thank you, sir. This is a nice one. Is UJLE organising celebrations when the pandemic is over?
I have a meeting tomorrow morning at 10:30 for that to be discussed for the first time, and I suspect that the answer will be yes, by which we will be encouraging provinces to have their own celebrations, and we will no doubt have an appropriate national service of remembrance for those Freemasons who have passed to the Grand Lodge above, and also a national celebration of some of the wonderful things that our members have managed to accomplish over the period of the pandemic.
Yeah. How many people are employed at Great Queen Street, and what is your budget?
We're around £12 million a year in terms of budget, and I have 100 staff. So the 100 staff is around 50 staff for sort of office functions, which splits into Masonic services, member services, IT, HR, and the sort of support staff. And then the rest are security, porters, and the sort of the upkeep and upholsterers, carpenters, electricians who keep Freemasons Hall itself going. We have cut £4.5 million off our operating budget this year because of the need to tighten our belts because of the pandemic. I have made 10% of our staff redundant because of the need to slash our operating costs. We have cut a good few £1 million in projects for this year and next year and push them further down the road into the future. Any perception that we're merrily chugging our way through your fees without paying due regard to the financial consequences of the pandemic and safeguarding the organisation for the future and for future generations of Masons is wrong. We have done quite a lot to ensure that the organisation is still here in 10 years, 20 years, 50 years time. And that's on the background of a complete collapse in our commercial income because all of our tenants went bust and left. And our investment income, which now is doing significantly better again, but certainly at the beginning it wasn't looking terribly good. So I've probably interpreted what the question was getting at. I hope that's a full enough answer, which covers both what you asked and what you meant.
Thank you, sir. Brethren, we're delighted that our Grand Secretary has spent most of the evening answering questions. So I'm going to put 2 or 3 more questions to our Grand Secretary. Given the indissoluble link between craft and Royal Arch, Why can we not have? It's just my questions have just jumped up our place. Given the indissoluble link between craft and rural arch, why can we not have the new initiate pay one fee to cover the fourth regular step?
I think the simple answer is because we're two separate organisations limited by constitution. So we are separate organisations. And unless you're going to have cross-charging from Supreme Grand Chapter to UGLE, it wouldn't work. At some future point and under different management, it may be possible to bring the two so that we are united as one order, but that's simply not the case at the moment. The United Grand Lodge of England is ruled by the craft rulers, and the day-to-day management is from the Board of General Purposes, whereas Supreme Grand Chapter is a separate organisation ruled by the Royal Arch rulers and run by the Committee of General Purposes. And although we are co-located at Freemasons Hall in our headquarters, and although some people have dual roles, including me, Masonically, we are separate orders with separate finances, separate investments, separate structures, separate governance, and so having one fee just wouldn't work.
Will Grand Lodge be considering any financial incentives to help lodges, bearing in mind that members have paid their dues as normal?
No, and we won't, because we see this as a once in a lifetime upset in something which has caused enormous sort of heartbreak and pain financially and emotionally and personally this year, but is unlikely ever to be repeated, certainly in our lifetimes. Our job is to safeguard the organisation for the future. We are a high cost, fixed cost organisation, and although we've done an awful lot to reduce our outgoings and safeguard our income, we haven't had any meetings in Freemasons Hall. We haven't had any commercial hire in Freemasons Hall for nearly a year. And you wouldn't thank us if we gave you all a tenner back and then went bust in 5 years' time. And so the honest answer is that stewardship means making difficult decisions, not just for today, but also for the future. And assure you is that these things have been debated by serious people with a huge amount of experience and knowledge in these areas, and all options have been looked at, and the decision. I think the biggest change is almost certainly something I alluded to earlier, which is the involvement of lots of people and lots of views in the decision-making processes at the centre. It wasn't like that, and it is now. Similarly, there's been a huge cultural change within the headquarters building itself. It was two separate organisations. There was the commercial side and there was the Masonic side, and they didn't like each other very much, and they spent a lot of the time lobbing rocks at each other and literally building physical barriers of filing cabinets between the two different bits in the office. And one thing that I have managed to do is take the central organisation through a process which means we are now very much one organisation working for an agreed set of goals according to agreed set of values which serve you, our members, in the best way that we can. We're not there yet. There's a lot more that we can do, and there's a lot more that we can get better. But I think that has certainly been a huge change since I started. In terms of what am I most proud of, it's always a difficult question to answer, isn't it? Because you can answer the egomaniac question and say, well, actually, I really enjoyed this and it's all about me. Or you can give the politically correct answer and say it's all about the team and something along those lines. I mean, I have the great honour of doing a job that I absolutely love. And I also have the experience of being brought up in a family when my father didn't do a job that he loved, but he went out every day to put me through school, and he didn't complain at all, and he sort of beavered away, and I never take for granted the fact that how lucky I am to be able to do something that I just thoroughly enjoy, and have managed to hit that golden sweet spot of turning a hobby which I loved into something that I'm now actually paid to do. So, when I end up working 11, 12 hours a day, 7 days a week without a holiday for months on end, I do actually remind myself that I just thoroughly enjoy it and I'm extraordinarily lucky to be doing it. I thoroughly enjoyed being at the tercentenary celebrations. I thought that was a huge honour. I enjoyed less getting to the leading the procession down to find His Royal Highness's personal protection officer sat in my seat, and so I had to stand up for an hour and a half because there wasn't a seat for the Deputy Grand Director of Ceremonies to sit in, and he had a big gun, so I wasn't going to argue with him. But to be part of that and see all of those different Grand Lodges from all across the world was something spectacular. But the thing I enjoy most is sitting next to somebody I've not sat next to before, and just finding out a little bit about them. And there are some remarkable people out there. Everybody is remarkable in one way. Everybody has a story which other people find fascinating. And one of the great things about our organisation is that you not only see your mates at Lodge, but you see other people's mates. And I'm in a position where I'm lucky enough occasionally to fly abroad and see people from different backgrounds and different cultures, which I would never otherwise come into contact with. I think the friends that I have made in the last 3 or 4 years is probably the thing that touches me most and that I'm most proud of.
Grand Secretary, we would like to thank you for all the work that you do for us in Freemasonry, and we'd like to thank you for joining us here this evening for what was a superb audience with. We didn't prepare our Grand Secretary with any of those questions previously, brethren, so would you please show him our usual respect with a silent round of applause. Thank you very much indeed, brethren, and thank you very much indeed, Grand Secretary. And as always, our final thoughts and final words with our Provincial Grand Master.
Thank you, Brodie, very much. Grand Secretary, thank you very much indeed for being with us in Worcestershire today. It's been a great pleasure to have you with us and a great honour. We've enjoyed it very much indeed. Your visit has inevitably attracted a large audience, not only of Worcestershire brethren, but visitors from far and wide. I'm sure we've all enjoyed it very much. We've learned a great deal and we shall take much away from it. You mentioned the need to celebrate at the end of the pandemic and as we return to normality, and Worcestershire will certainly be on board in doing that. We have certainly ideas for plans for celebration at our various meeting places. And we will also be having a memorial service to remember those who we've lost at Worcester Cathedral, which I could point out to you that the view behind me is in fact the Undercroft at Worcester Cathedral, which is a newly completed and very successful and impressive project for which Worcestershire Masonic Charity Organisation contributed and which was generously match funded by the MCF, something which the Dean and Chapter are very grateful. As you said earlier, your arrival as a Grand Secretary and Chief Executive Officer of the Writing Grand Lodge of England in 2017, 2018 coincided with an opportunity to respond to several seriously inaccurate press comments, which you did in a way that made great impact. The mantra, enough is enough, will live with us, I'm sure, for a long time to come. You are obviously tackling the twin objectives of modernising the administration of UGLE and further enhancing the reputation of Freemasonry with vigour. And I'm sure that there's no thinking Freemason that will not want to support you in those aims to fullest extent. I had to confess that it was only recently that I looked at your own personal website. Your distinguished medical career is, of course, listed there. But what I didn't realise until I looked closely at it was you list amongst your outside interests rowing. And as you may know, we had a regatta at Worcester on the River Severn in 2019, and are hoping very much to be able to do it again in this summer, all being well, nothing yet guaranteed. But I'm happy to lay down another challenge to you, David, if you would wish to rise to that challenge, along with the Assistant Grand Master, and you'd be very welcome, of course, all in the cause of charity. We I'd like to thank the comms team, Brodie Swain, our PCO, and all of the team for another very successful audience with the whole series has been a great success, most enjoyable, and this is a highlight of that. Thank you all, brethren, for attending. And thank you, David, once again for joining us in Worcestershire. It's been a pleasure to have you with us, and we're very grateful to you for making your time available. Brethren, before we depart, as Brodie said, we customarily remember at this time absent brethren, and it'd be particularly appropriate, I think, having lost tragically worship brother Chris Verminger last Friday, an event which has left his family distraught and has shocked all of us in the province. Christopher Vanderler Verminger was a great character, a great Freemason, and a great friend to many of us. We shall miss him hugely. Dying at the age of 57 was far too soon. And brethren, if you do have a glass to hand, please would you join me in remembering absent brethren, and in particular, virtual brother Chris Verminger. Thank you, Brodie. Can I just hand back to you?
Indeed, sir. Thank you very much indeed for your final words and for those comments at the end regarding Chris. Brethren, I'm sure you'll agree it has been a fantastic evening. Thanks to our Grand Secretary. Once again, please, a silent round of applause.
Right, Worshipful Provincial Grandmaster, brethren, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much indeed for having me.
Thank you, sir. As always, brethren, we have plenty more audience whiffs up our sleeve. We will keep you posted in the next few days and the next few weeks. But until our next happy meeting, we shall see you very soon.